who are not familiar with HealthXL, we are a digital health community, and we try to bring together the insights and the people to really help move the needle in digital health. And this is a subject that's really close to both HealthXL and all of our members as well. And that's why we've brought together this incredible group to talk a little bit about it. And I'm going to give a bit of context shortly on why we're talking about this and what you can expect over the next 60 minutes or so. But I might just quickly take a minute to introduce the incredible people that you see on this panel with me here. So we have with us Chris Wasden, who's the head of Digital Therapeutics at HappifyHealth. Welcome, Chris. We have Will Gibbs, the principal at Octopus Ventures. Ed Kliphuis, apologies if I said his surname incorrectly, partner at Amadeus Capital Partners. Richie Bavasso, who's the CEO of NQ Medical. And Eugene as well, of course, chairman and COO of YourCoach.Health. We're waiting on Liz Ashall-Payne from ORCHA. Hopefully she'll be joining us soon. So welcome all of you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hello.
Okay, what I might do is I'm just gonna provide a bit of context on why we're here to talk about prescription digital therapeutics. A couple of years ago, we put out a framework, which is a collective effort, by the DTA, Node Health Time, and HealthXL to help define digital therapeutics and how this really stood out from the broader bucket of all digital health products out there to really help differentiate, right? These are products that are evidence-based and they help prevent, treat, or manage a medical condition. And fast forward 2 years, and it's been 2 really active years in the space that all of you obviously know about, and so much has changed. And everybody now wants to be a digital therapeutic product. So, it's a bit of jumping on the bandwagon, and probably because being a digital therapeutic probably means you work, right? That's the association, that you are a robust, solid product and solution. And therefore, now we have lots of digital therapeutics out there. So we wanted to double click a little bit on one specific group of these digital therapeutics products that are prescription only. So in a way, like the purest of the digital therapeutics products out there, which have to be prescribed by your physician in order for you to consume it to help you with the condition. And we released a report on this about a month ago with exits and outcomes. Unfortunately, Brian can't join us, and we're really proud of this report. And throughout this conversation, we'd love to kind of pepper some of the excerpts and findings from that report. And I might just start off by sharing my screen and defining what we mean by prescription digital therapeutics through the course of this conversation as we featured it in the report. So real quickly then, once this loads. Okay. So a prescription digital therapeutic is a prescription-only software that delivers evidence-based therapeutic interventions to prevent, manage, or treat a medical disorder or disease. So in other words, the software-driven behavior change is really the active ingredient in this formulation. I'm going to take this further and describe how we've categorized PDT companies into these 4 buckets. And I'm really happy to be challenged on this. And this is really what I want us to discuss a little bit as well. We've based this on essentially their go-to-market strategy, but also their regulatory approvals, right? So the first category right on top here are PDT companies who have prescription products that are regulated by the FDA as prescription only. So in a way, the purest of them, and all of these you'll see are mostly software-based interventions. The second category here are PDT companies that are regulated by the FDA as prescription only. However, this approval is not actually for the digital therapeutic component of the product. It's for the medical calculator or the dosing calculator, which obviously comes with a certain level of risk. However, they're marketed as a prescription digital therapeutic as a result. The third category then are PDT companies with over-the-counter solutions that are not FDA regulated as prescription only products, but then they're using a prescription distribution channel to reach their market or audience. And this is probably because they want to be prescribed and they want to have those type of outcomes on their patient populations. And finally, the last category here are PDT companies that today have only over-the-counter products, but they have a pipeline of products that intend to be FDA regulated as prescription only. Okay, so with that, for context, we'd love to open it up to all of you. Do you agree, disagree, want to challenge that? And is there really a perfect model to go to market?
So I'll throw some things in there with regards to perfect model to go to market. And this is based upon observations of not just ourselves, but others out there. When you look at the different types of products, right, you have some, and WellDoc's a good example, right? They started out as a PDT. That was their business strategy. That was their go-to-market. They found that that was very difficult for many reasons. Dealing with payers was difficult. Dealing with doctors was difficult. And so then they've tried every other channel, right? They did a deal with Samsung to go direct to consumer. They did a deal with pharma companies to integrate it with their medical devices. And really where they've evolved at the end of the day is to go directly to employers as well as health plans and really not go through the physician. And so I think a lot of companies, you see this in the MSK space as well. You see this with Livongo and Omada. They don't go through physicians as PDTs. In fact, Omada's even taken back whether or not they even call themselves a digital therapy company at all. So I think the challenge has been, how do we get the products in patients' hands? And through a physician as a PDT is one channel, but there's also through pharma companies, through their patient support program, that's a channel. Health plans are a channel, employers are a channel. And so you have to have a multi-channel strategy to be successful as a company. And then also with that multi-channel strategy, the other thing that you're seeing is that most of the most successful companies in the digital therapeutic space are providing a layer of human service associated with their therapy for which they can charge. So the majority of the revenues from Livongo and Omada are associated with them charging for coaching and clinical services in addition to their digital therapy. You see Free Spirit doing this as well. And so I think that there's this emerging model that you need to have a clinical service element with the digital therapy, and that clinical service element can be provided by the digital therapeutic company itself as a revenue stream, or can be provided by some sort of a clinician, whether it be a therapist or a physician or something like this. So this is kind of the emerging model of what's going on there, multi-channel and service elements provided by different types of service providers.
Go ahead, Will.
I was going to say, I think another challenge is around the use of FDA as a measure of robustness of data and efficacy. And clearly it is a stamp and it's a logo that everyone knows, but I don't think it's necessarily the only stamp. And I think this is when you get into shades of gray. So we're an investor in Big Health, which has a DTx for insomnia and for anxiety. We're also an investor in Quit Genius, which has DTxs for substance addiction, neither of which are FDA approved. And I don't think that's on the cards for either in the short term. Like Big Health has 10 RCTs, each with like thousands of individuals in. Same with Quit Genius. I think they have 3 RCTs, each with multiple thousands of individuals. So I would say they have clinical efficacy, peer-reviewed journals, all of that stuff, but they don't have the FDA affiliation. And I think it's the right question of actually, like, when looking at DTx businesses, of what is the clinical value, what is the efficacy, has that been put through bold, like robust methodological challenge? But I think there's other ways of getting there than just with FDA. But then it becomes more of a kind of judgment call.
Well, first of all, since I had the pleasure of interviewing Peter right before you and I interview, so it's 13 RCTs now. And this actually goes back to a little bit of the founding team and the hypothesis, what as a company you want to go after. And because I think we have people representing here, investors in multiple channels, right? And hand to Ed, but like Akili or neurological disorders, we want to be prescription. This needs to be there. Chris, you're representing actually, I think, one of the few players in the field that are really truly multi-channel strategy, right? Across employers, pharma, et cetera. So I do think that, again, it's back to the big hypothesis. And look, we're seeing and finding that there's room for all of those approaches. the one questionable one I still have, let's see how Summrist is doing for Tera, right? The truly prescription as an example. Let's see where, Achilles product, while I love the team, I love what they're doing, let's see how that scales.
Yeah, there's a great experience I had. I ran a panel many years ago at a medical conference where I had a PDT prescribing physician that prescribed a PDT for diabetes. And I said, doctor, how many diabetic patients do you have? He says, 500. I said, so do you provide 500 prescriptions for this diabetic PDT? And he says, no, I provide 100. I said, really? Why only 100? He says, well, it's kind of like this. He says, 100 of my patients do everything I ask them to do, so they don't need one. 100 of my patients never do anything I ask them to do. They would never use one. 100 of my patients don't even have a cell phone, so they can't use one. And then 100 of my patients don't have a health plan that would pay for something like this. And so after I do that triage, there's only 100 patients left that could actually use this product.
I thought this was going to be the first and only DTx actual joke. So, Chris.
Ed, you were coming in earlier.
Yeah, I was going to build on something Will said, because I think for us, the way we look at it, I had the pleasure of being an early investor in Achilles and witnessed that journey. And we invested in companies like Altoida and Sonda Health after that. And it's truly a tactical decision to go for regulatory approval. I'll give you a prime example. Sonda Health is a vocal biomarker company. Now, we were going for a regulatory approved vocal biomarker in the depression space. But of course, we had as a second and third indication also respiratory indications. And now come COVID. So all of a sudden, we have a fantastic tool here that basically we can have a early detection for COVID for back to work. And that doesn't necessarily need a regulatory approval. So we deployed it with great success in the US and in India. And ultimately had a fantastic data set built of that, had a real benefit to the employers, and have been able to now engage in a number of follow-on trials to have a number of further biomarkers approved, hopefully in 2022 and beyond. So I see it as a tactical decision more than anything.
I kind of agree with that, right? Because what I'm really curious to see is for some of the folks like Ackley who have been the early pioneers of trying to get that breakthrough device or de novo certification by the FDA, what that's created is a beeline now for everybody else to perhaps get a 510K at the back of that. And if we see a lot of that happening, I would argue then that that strategy has worked, or that's basically becoming the footprint of products versus say, I would agree that we need to have RCTs or some sort of clinical validation studies that apply to these software interventions, but is that enough? I guess it's a bit of what comes first, right? What's more important? And going back to the omni-channel strategy, then who are you selling to? I think different things will matter.
Well, it's maybe quickly answering on that, and I hope I don't cut anybody off from the rest of the panel. But we did a retrospective analysis together with Achilles on this. And for Achilles, it was the right choice, no doubt about it. But it comes with certain trade-offs. If you think about regulatory approval, venture capital by its nature is drawn into areas where you can de-risk quickly. And therapeutics can de-risk along a regulatory framework. Now, B2C businesses, you can de-risk by quickly getting market feedback. And here you have this hybrid space where you either get the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds. And that's what I meant with the tactical decision. So you have to play to the strengths of digital therapeutics if you wish to de-risk quickly the assets that you're trying to develop. Again, for Achilles, it was very clear this was going to be a prescription medical device or prescription software as a medical device. But for other things, perhaps getting quick market feedback and iterating on the fly is a much better decision. So I don't think you can make a silver bullet decision on it.
Yeah, I would add one other thing that we've found is interesting as we've moved forward. When you do an RCT with, even if it's 1,000 people and they're getting the product for free and you're paying them to be part of a study, you really don't know whether or not a patient in the wild would really use your product and continue to use your product over time. And so what you've seen is that the data that's collected through RCTs that are given to the FDA really are not reflective of whether or not these products will be commercially successful. It reflects that they got through the FDA, and the FDA has, to their credit, has provided some good guidelines for how products can be cleared by the FDA. When we look at what we're trying to accomplish, and that is that if a digital therapeutic is not used by a patient repeatedly, then it will not be effective. So you have to have this engagement engine so that you can find, attract, engage, and keep people coming back again and again over time to get the therapy. And the only way you're going to do that, at least in our experience, is by having millions of people use the product. And that's part of the challenge I think we have with a lot of these digital therapeutic companies. They've not done anything at scale to know whether or not their products actually would work. And when I say work, I'm not talking about passing an FDA clinical trial. I'm talking about, because that's kind of the bare minimum standard. I'm talking about work that you're going to get hundreds of thousands or millions of people to download and use this on their own, with or without a clinician, so that you can deliver the therapeutic benefit.
If I may, I think both of your points are valid. From the entrepreneur perspective, we try to be opportunistic. We look at all the available channels. In my particular space, employers aren't really viable for me because I'm in a geriatric neurological space. So it's hard to have that conversation. But I think Edward's point, again, from my entrepreneur perspective, is de-risking. I mean, what is our goal? Well, our goal is certainly to achieve a digital therapeutic that has usefulness in the market, both with patients and providers, but also my next round of investment. And I know that when I pass my FDA clearance, that's a checkbox, and that gives me that stability to move on. Is that the best pathway to commercial success? No. I mean, the FDA's mandate is public safety, not commercial readiness, not even clinical efficacy. It's public safety. So I think when I counsel and I mentor young companies, there's some mandatory hurdles you have to pass, but ultimately you do, to Chris's point, you need people lining up for miles, waiting to download your app and actually using it, or you have no value.
Sorry, go ahead, Will.
I was going to say, Chris, building on your point about, I suppose, biases in the data sets used by the FDA to potentially evaluate, or equally for claims to be made about DTx businesses. I think there was something written previous, like in the last couple of weeks, like actually really interrogating some of the data that sits behind these studies. And I think some of the outputs were slightly worrying. But I would say that with both Big Health and Quit Genius, where the payer is ultimately the employer, and they have that efficacy data, and typically they're paying on a per user, per month, or per year basis, there are other feedback loops, i.e. if you're not delivering efficacy, the employers won't help you enroll, they won't continue to extend the contract. So even if there are some biases in that data set of being recognized initially, there are other feedback loops to make sure that the best products get kind of highlighted, and hopefully the worst businesses that rely more on marketing rather than efficacy get weeded out.
Yeah. And to that point, so we have, and this is publicly disclosed, Cigna's our largest payer client, and we've got nearly 20 million covered lives with them. And when you look at the journey that we had with Cigna, which I think is reflective of any company that has a payer or employer relationship, right? You spend the first year of that relationship in an RFP process, okay? Then you spend the second year doing a small pilot. Then you spend the third year doing a larger pilot. Then you spend the fourth year with some of their leading customers who will actually use your product. Then you spend the fifth year actually scaling it. So if you don't have 5 years to go through that process with a payer, employers are a bit faster, but there's a similar sort of path that you go through. You will never get to scale with these companies. It's a 5-year journey to generate meaningful revenues from these companies.
And Chris, Chris, would you say that despite the channel you choose, it's the same scenario? I mean, I'm saying the same thing if you want to partner with a pharma company. It's the same long journey of pilot through integration through all the way to ultimately you'll get a scale. Could be 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and that's, so we, you know, we have relationships with big pharma companies, with big payers, with big employers. We have a direct consumer business. Yeah, direct consumer is wonderful because if you deliver value to the consumer, you can actually grow really quickly there, right? So we got 3 million users of our app through the direct to consumer channel, which was great because we learned really quickly. That revenue model, though, that business model is a tough one because patient acquisition costs are high and you're kind of on this treadmill. And we decided that a better distribution model would really be the health plans, the employers, and the pharma companies. But you're right, every one of them. Now, I would say that depending on the pharma company, you can move a little bit faster than the payers. And that's because payers have this annual time or annual clock, like that they do everything in year increments. And so it takes a year to get to that next step. Whereas with the pharma companies, there's no year calendar that's, although they have annual budgets, which somewhat constrain this, but you can move a little bit faster because you're not predestined or consigned to a year calendar for things. But employers are very much like the health plans, though. They have, they refresh their benefits every year. And so what are they going to add as a new benefit? And so they go through an RFP process and a pilot process and things. So I think the employers are very much like that as well.
Eugene?
No, go ahead, Liz.
Thank you. Thanks. And I was just reflecting really and really listening to all this fabulous insight. And I think what we're talking about here is how we're building trust in a marketplace that doesn't trust digital therapeutics. And your point, Chris, it takes a long time to build that trust. And you just described a process of building trust and, regulation, FDA approval, that's a part of the trust jigsaw puzzle, but it's not the silver bullet. And I know somebody's put in the chat there about real world evidence. And I think that what we need to start to see is that regulation and compliance moves to a much more agile method. So I talk to people at Big Health, and I know that one of the reasons they're continuously doing RCTs is because when they get to the end of the RCT, the product's changed, and therefore they need to re-go through that process. That's not sustainable. And what we need to be doing is gathering real world evidence on the impact of these digital therapeutics, because not only are the digital therapeutics evolving and responding to user needs, so too are our populations. Digital therapeutic attitudes, the way in which we consume this information is changing too. And so I think that there is an evolving picture amongst the regulators that they do know they need to do something different. I don't think they necessarily know what that is, but I think that collectively as an industry, we need to be supporting the future picture of building trust as a go-to-market strategy. And the second thing I just wanted to link up there was how we have to directly link the building of trust to reimbursement. And somebody's put a question about market access across Europe. So for example, in Germany, they've passed a law that says if you've met regulatory compliance and your doctor recommends a digital therapeutics to you, that your private insurer has to pay for that product. And so again, we're seeing some really interesting connections amongst compliance and quality checks with reimbursement. And again, that's got to be the way forward.
I think there's one little piece missing, and Liz, you hit on 99% of it. And let's presume for a moment that I've gone through my clinical trials and I have very compelling evidence, and I've got regulatory approval across the globe, and patients even like it when they use it. But getting doctors to prescribe it is difficult. I mean, look at the drug company model. The drug company, I mean, all the money they have, take away their field force and their marketing budget, no one's going to prescribe their drugs. I don't care how good they are. So I think what's missing in companies like mine and is that $1 billion budget to actually market the product once it's 100% past all the hurdles.
But let's take a quick example because we're seeing now Pear Somrist being advertised on Facebook, right? So. And back to, I think, what Chris has actually started with this, if you delight that end consumer of that digital therapeutic, right? If the experience, yes, you need to find the channels, but the engagement is also, right? I mean, Chris, you mentioned 20 million covered, right? And if you swap over to a large employer, if you cover 500,000 lives, what's the engagement level of those employees to actually know about it, right? And so I think for the DTX companies and whichever route you're taking, whether you're looking at Big Health, right? That started, somewhat in D2C space, right? Working with NHS, moved over to US with the employers, or with a very sort of pointed way to market. Let's take Pear or Achille, right? You've seen that engaging that end consumer in a DTX space is actually seems to be an important line. I mean, Chris, you mentioned earlier 3 or 4 million direct to consumer downloads and users, right? So
Sorry, I was just going to, Eugene, totally agree. I actually think if you like simplify this, and we've touched on this in a number of ways. So we're talking about two sort of approaches. One is if we go, like Richie mentioned, if the HCP doesn't prescribe it, then it's never going to be used, and that applies to a drug. So for the PDT as well, they have to go down this pharma route essentially, which is Salesforce. Maybe that's the role for the pharma. It's the pharma sales force, or it's their own sales force. You really have to push the message that these products exist and you prescribe it for the following indications. Here's the adverse event list, et cetera, et cetera. That's like the pharma pathway, which I think a lot of the software-based ones are going to take, because that is the treatment itself. And then you have what you're describing there, which is kind of the telemedicine or telehealth pathway, which is D2C marketing strategies, even if it's a prescription product in the end, but it's like creating that awareness and I guess empowering the patient to ask for a treatment or seek this treatment.
So let me rain on our parade for just a minute. When you look at a prescription digital therapy price, and so we're now starting to see some convergence around price. When you look at what's going on in Europe with Germany, when you look at what's going on in the United States with Achille and Freespira and Pear, we're starting to see now that the prices for digital therapeutics are converging somewhere around between $500 and $1,000 per course of therapy. And those course of therapy is somewhere around 8 to 12 weeks. If you go to a pharma company and say, how interested are you in having your sales reps detail a product that costs $700? The answer is not interested at all, right? If you multiply, let's take an area, any of these specialty areas, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, right? Where you've got 1 or 2 million patients in the United States, for example, that have the condition. So a pharma company on average would have somewhere between 20 to 100,000, 150,000 patients on therapy. If you take that number of patients, multiply it by $1,000 per patient, it's not a number that's large enough that those pharma companies care about. Right? So they're not going to spend their sales reps' time selling a PDT for those patients. What they would do, which is different, they would have their sales reps spend time selling a product that combines the PDT with their drug that generates 3 sources of data: adherence data, quality of life data, and efficacy of outcome data, clinical efficacy of outcome data. Because that data, they can then take to the payers and say, I can now justify you paying $20,000 or $50,000 a year for my drug therapy because I'm gathering this data through my digital therapy, which, by the way, is also providing treatment benefit to these patients. And because of that, now you can be confident that you're getting value for what you're paying for the drug. But it's only the combination that the pharma companies are going to care about selling. They are not going to care about selling just a PDT. Now, that doesn't mean that a PDT company can't create a meaningful business selling a PDT, okay? There are medical device products and other products out there that have price points of $700 or $1,000 that you can create a viable business selling if you can come up with the right selling strategies and channels. But if you go through that, say a $700 price for a PDT, which again is kind of the average in Germany right now, it's what's emerging as the average in the United States. Achilles, I think at $450 as an example. So if you are going to do a digital marketing campaign to get a patient to download your app, the acquisition cost for that patient is going to be around $200 to $300 per patient. Okay. So again, we're starting with $700. We just took off $200 to $300 for the marketing and sales effort. Okay. Then there's dispensing costs. If this is a prescription digital therapy, there's an issue of how you're going to dispense it. If you're going to use a pharmacy to dispense it, you've got to add another $50 to $150 for dispensing costs. Okay. So now you start cutting that, right? And you start to see how much money you're going to be able to make as a profit on that. And it's just a few $100s per script. Right.
Chris, I just want to add one quick thing. And unless, so I'm fully with you. Drug plus is the name of the game for pharma, right? Because again, the math doesn't add up on a standalone PDT business, right? From a large pharma company. However, and I'll use Akili again as the example. You mentioned it is for $450 for, I think, a 12-week program. If you look at, I'll just pick Ritalin. I don't know, monthly cost $150 to $200 a month. If Akili is getting a substantial size of the pocket of the parents that don't want their kids to be on that, now it becomes a danger for a pharma company, right? So I think this is where those standalone hypotheses start working. This is sort of where I'm coming from on this, that it needs to put a lot of pressure. Otherwise, it is a drug plus.
Yeah, I just think that this links in with Rich's challenge, which I just want to respond to as well, which is about scalability. If we get more physicians and doctors prescribing digital therapeutics, then we've got scale. And Chris, to your point, that volume of money per digital therapeutics becomes huge because you've got massive scale in a global position. The challenge for any healthcare professional, be it a doctor or a nurse or a therapist, is awareness. They don't even know these solutions exist. That's my background. I'm clinical. We're not trained in this stuff. We're not trained, and that is where the problem starts. But the next problem is we're also trained to be extraordinarily risk averse, and we're trained not to recommend or prescribe anything that we don't intimately understand. And so that comes back to the trust issue. So we have to, first of all, raise awareness. We have to really think carefully about how we're driving a digitally ready workforce at scale, and then make sure that the reimbursement systems are set up to deal with that scale of pace. Because if you look at Germany, for example, you're absolutely right, hardly any products have been prescribed. And that's because the doctor's not quite sure what to prescribe or how to prescribe. And then if they do achieve scale, we're going to need better systems and processes for that reimbursement to flow. Because at the minute, it's all handled by humans and in letters. I mean, it's just the most horrendous process. But I think you're absolutely right, Rich. I couldn't agree more with you. So yeah, I just really wanted to pick up on that.
Well, I have to laugh and listen to Chris, because I'm thinking about pharmaceutical sales rep. Pharmaceutical sales rep won't even promote the second line or third line product in their bag, and they're going to promote a digital therapeutic. And I want to throw out to the group this scenario that we haven't discussed yet. But for 30 years, pharma's been investing in value add programs to support their drug. They give them the giveaways, right? Is there a revenue opportunity for the digital therapeutic to not worry about the per prescription cost, but to get a lump sum from the pharma company that says, hey, we're going to distribute this because this quote unquote dose calculator, whatever you want to call it, actually helps with little stickiness for adherence, helps my physician understand how to prescribe this product. And I'm going to pay you X per, I don't know, per distribution, or just like they did 30 years ago when they had some kind of payment product. I mean, is that a viable revenue stream for companies like mine?
Yeah, so I think it is. And here's the several reasons why. If you look at almost any expensive drug, these pharma companies are spending, in fact, we know of pharma companies that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year for these patient support programs, hundreds of millions, all right? And within the offering they have, there are frequently different digital products they're offering. They're, psychoeducation or trackers or, dosing or things like that. Now, some of these products they've created themselves. Some of these products they've created in partnership with others. Some of these products they license from others. My personal experience has been that none of the products they create themselves are any good, and that they would be much better off licensing products that have been proven to be successful. And the other thing is, part of the reason their products aren't good aren't because they don't have talented, capable people, but when you look at their process for approving internally, approving and regulating and improving them over time, their processes just don't align with software. I can give you one example that we're dealing with. We've developed a product for a pharma client for their patient support program, okay? It took us 4 months to develop the product. You know, why so quickly? Because we have a platform and we already have everything on the platform. So we just configure it for a specific disease, right? And so so we can do that very quickly. It's taking this pharma company 5 months to agree on the protocol we would use to test the product that we made in 4 months. All right. And then we will have a protocol that tests the product over 6 months. So bringing our product to market, the constraint has been the processes for review and approval of the pharma company, and then the processes for the trial to validate the efficacy of the product, right? Now, a pharma company could not have created that product themselves in 4 months. They couldn't have created it in 12 months, maybe even 24 months. So them trying to create the product themselves causes this to go from what will be a little over a year-long process to a multi-year process. And then when we've dealt with these pharma clients, once they even have a product they've created, we then talk to them about their approval process to make changes, even slight changes to the product. And that can take many, many months. Whereas for a company like us, we can make these product changes in weeks.
Chris, forget about product. You know, even the LMR process itself may take 3 months.
Right.
Just a little content change.
And at the end of 12 months, you've got a new brand manager, so they want to do their own thing. So let's start over again.
Every 18 months, you're dealing with a different pharma person because they all rotate through their jobs. And so there's no continuity.
So, but it sounds like I mean, obviously the challenges exist. Eugene, I'd love your thoughts as well on this, actually. So we have a predicament here. The pharma company sales force is not motivated to sell this. We as a DTx company probably don't have the type of money to build our own sales force. Some of the math around direct-to-consumer digital marketing is not quite adding up. So what do we do?
I don't know if it does or does not add up. I think it's, again, the team you build and the DNA of the team, because somebody who is marketing direct to consumer, clinically validated product, I mean, let's take, you know, Happify, that's a different DNA of the team and go to market and all of that, right? I do want to loop back. So even on the pharma side, I fully agree it's a drug plus scenario. But I also agree that patient support programs today are cost of doing business, and many pharma companies are almost afraid to touch them, right? I mean, they're adding things on, but remember, a lot of this adverse event reporting goes through these. They're highly, highly outsourced across the globe, right? And so I actually still think that there's a tremendous role for DTx companies that can pull and sort of take out the long tail of the patient support programs that are highly dispersed and merge it together, because that's not being looked at from a data perspective as a pharma company, or not to the extent it should be.
Yeah,
maybe quickly, if you allow me to chime in, because just like you, Eugene, we both come from, let's say, a pharma alma mater, and then moved on to a dark side, albeit a slightly different one for each of us.
Everything is a dark side.
Exactly. But the observation I made was investing in digital therapeutics and digital health on behalf of Ventures, the corporate venture arm of Merck. First of all, it's not a zero-sum game. Secondly, there is the current sort of like solutions we see are existing solutions, so existing patient support programs or whatever in new channels. The thing that we're seeing now, of which again, Akili is a hallmark, but Son, for instance, is a completely new technology playing into an existing market. The thing we'll hopefully see after this is a completely novel technology playing into a blue sky market. We're probably not ready for that last one yet. So the first two are interesting examples, because if you look at these sort of like novel channels, existing technology, novel channels, oftentimes you're bound by geographical limitations. So the US is still a very interesting market, but if you do certain patient support programs, you're bound by the limitations of that particular geography. So if you go into Europe, all of a sudden you have a fragmentation that is almost mutually exclusive to the scaling of this solution, because you're selling into brand managers' budgets of pharma. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Chris. Oftentimes just a solution provider at that level is much more interesting than actually going through the same channels as a piece of digital packaging. However, in that sort of like second part where you're doing a novel modality, and again, I'll take Achilles as an example, where you're inducing neuroplasticity through a completely new modality, that can be a therapeutic in and of itself, but it can also be either a channel generator, for instance, for early detection of, let's say, Alzheimer's, or a treatment augmentation, and even cutting the delayed feedback cycle to a point that you can do precision medication, for instance, for indications like multiple sclerosis, where actually shrinking of the brain is one of the earliest hallmarks of the onset of the disease, and therefore you can pinpoint when a particular individual needs the next dose. And I think that is the key of that second category, and I hope that's the key of what we're going to witness. The power of DTx and the power of digital to cut delayed feedback and to sort of like cut through the standardization that we built in our healthcare system and make therefore healthcare much more efficacious.
I think part of the challenge is that that's the future that does require lots of regulatory complexity to get the FDA to agree that digital biomarkers are accurately measuring things that we've measured in other ways before and actually are preventing the disease. I think one other thing on this patient support program focused area, as well as these novel, something Eugene talked about, kind of novel channels to patients. You know, we have, our roots are in direct-to-consumer marketing, okay, and direct-to-consumer, activation using gaming mechanics and gaming principles. Our founders came from the video game industry, okay? What we have found, we talk to our pharma clients, is that only about 10% of their patients are on their patient support program. So to deliver value to their patients, who they don't even know who they are, requires them to find their patients, and they're not very good at finding their patients. And so what we have seen is that having an ability to digitally find patients, activate patients on therapy that they're willing to pay for the development of, and engaging them over a sustained period of time has tremendous value for a pharma. So our relationships with pharma companies almost always start by us doing a proof of concept pilot where we will go out and find 5,000 of their patients in 2 or 3 weeks through digital marketing campaigns. And then we will get those 5,000 patients to download our app, to use our app, to receive clinical benefit. We can then measure and then take back to the pharma company and say, okay, we found patients you didn't even know about. We got them to use this product. We've shown clinical benefit from this product. We've also shown benefit associated with the disease that you care about for this product. And then that is what gets them confident that this can be a good complement to their patient support program, because they need help finding their patients as well as engaging their patients.
So hold that thought, Chris, because you've created a nice beeline into this excellent question that's come in. So keeping in mind, gaming and those type of algorithms that the Netflixes and TikToks of the world are using, which obviously, one could argue are addictive almost. So the question really is, do you truly think that bigger marketing budgets will lead to greater awareness, which can actually increase patient engagement in these digital therapeutic products, in a meaningful way over the long term? And then the second part of that question is, do you think there is a future in which digital therapeutics actually leverage this addictive content, whether it's gaming or similar immersive experiences, to solve the problem of patient adoption?
Well, if I may, theoretically, the biggest challenge in this space is the word behavior. Changing patient behavior, changing clinician behavior, changing payer behavior. Ed and I went back and forth on this a long time ago. So how do you change behavior? Well, certainly big marketing budgets. Look at any consumer product, and they invest a lot of money to change behavior. So I think theoretically, the answer to your question is yes, bigger budgets could have an effect of raising the numbers, maybe from 10% to 20%. You're probably never going to get to 100%. And I think until we can devise a digital therapeutic that works, where we as humans have to do nothing, just like when we take a pill, we don't worry about what the pill does. We take the pill and okay, we're feeling better. Everything's fine. I mean, I have no behavior change. If I take the pill, I'm all set. It's the only behavior I have to worry about. Digital therapeutics have to evolve in that direction where there's less intervention required, and it will come. It will come.
And actually, maybe to add to that, I was joking with Eugene the other day. We should do sort of an end-type podcast on this, because this is where it gets scary, right? If you think about behavior change, you need to have the people who are least likely to adopt their behavior, to change their behavior, to really truly make an impact. It is, Jack in the Midwest who keeps eating pizza for breakfast.
You heard it here. You heard it here first. Ed and I are starting the Black Mirror of DTX podcast together.
Well, there you go. Exactly. No, but it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to come in on that. So we've got some numbers around this, because we create digital health libraries that go direct to the consumer, and then digital health formularies that go to healthcare professionals who then prescribe from there. And we see around about 6 to 7% conversion of end consumers downloading a digital therapeutics from a library. So it's pretty low. And to your point that you just made there, it's the already healthy communities that are actively looking for these solutions. Now you flip that on the other end, and what's the conversion rate post-prescription from your physician? It's 71 to 74%. And you're then able to target the unactivated communities who really need these interventions. And so I do think it comes back to this point, how are you marketing? Of course you can market to the consumers, but the people who are then going to use the opportunity are not necessarily the people you want to target. We have to go through the physicians. We have to do it in that way, in the same way we do with drugs. Just really wanted to share some of those numbers.
Let me give a little bit different perspective on that, because we actually get 25 to 30% conversion through our social media marketing campaigns. And then we have about 50% retention 12 months later using our products. And the people that are using our products are not people, and as you know, our primary product is on mental health, so anxiety, depression. So the people that are downloading this product are not people that are not depressed and anxious. In fact, just the opposite. 80, 90% of the people that are downloading our product have moderate to severe depression and anxiety. And so these are the people who need our product. And part of it is that we have a campaign that attracts these people around their problem and gives them hope that we have a solution that could work for them. So we're not getting healthy people to use our product. We're getting sick people to use our product. And we're getting these people to continue to use our product, which is the behavior change, over long periods of time. So I think if you apply the gaming mechanics and principles, I think if you have a value proposition that is compelling for the patient so they come back and use it again and again, I think there are novel ways to find these patients and activate them and get them help.
Can I ask a question to the whole panel then, maybe? Carrot or stick? Which one is it for behavior change?
It's both.
It's neither.
Yeah.
I would have said it depends. It depends on the individual.
And all those answers are part of the behavioral change.
Yeah. So we use behavioral economics principles as well as the other sorts of gaming mechanics and principles. And if you look at behavioral economic principles, they have both carrots and sticks. If you look at other sorts of principles that are applied by psychotherapists in CBT, it's carrots and sticks. If you look at what's applied in every aspect of life, it's both. But it's knowing how to do it. I've made the claim, and people in pharma can disagree with it, but I've made the claim that creating a successful digital therapy is more difficult than creating a drug. And the reason is that when you create a drug, it has very little human interaction elements to it, the color, the size, right, whether it's an injection or not, but it has a fairly limited human engagement factor to it. Whereas when you create a digital therapy, what determines whether or not someone uses it repeatedly around behavior change is its color, the text, the language that's used associated with it, the type of interaction, the types of experiences that people have, the length of the experience, the frequency you want them to have that experience. And I could go on and on. The variables associated with success in digital therapeutic are infinitely greater than the variables of success associated with a drug from a human interaction experience perspective.
And I think also building on that, and also Liz's point about marketing and engagement, I think, and thinking mostly with the kind of Quit Genius experience, that actually some of the most skilled and sophisticated people in this industry are actually those driving engagement within employers. And so like the task of how do you get engagement from someone on opioid addiction to actually talk about this openly within their kind of employee or employer base and actually drive engagement. And so it's kind of also very condition specific, because especially for like very taboo topics, whether it's alcoholism, opioid addiction, the actual nuanced communication strategy that's needed to bring those people in, and especially try a treatment class that maybe they've never tried if they're not an employee of Google or whatever, is actually a huge challenge. And I think to Chris's point, that the sophistication that's needed, not just to bring a product to market, but actually to then market and engage with the end users is not a trivial one.
You know, there was a comment in the chat, which a very good comment about a pill is launched and may not change for 15 years. However, Chris's point, I introduced a digital therapeutic. I'm updating it and improving it constantly. You know, it's better a year from now than particularly if I'm using machine learning. And that's a huge upside that I don't think the public understands, nor the commercial people who are investing in this.
Yeah.
I'm still maybe one quick comment, and I'm just going to throw it out as a contrarian view. I'm curious, Liz, what you're seeing. I'll call it somewhat on the ground through ORCHA. I'm still challenged to see ultimately that an actual doctor's prescription, right, is going to actually trigger the large volume of these digital therapeutics. And this is why I'm kind of looking at this as, again, I'll keep using Akili as the example, with Akili Care and or pairs teleservice where you get quickly sort of, you know, I'll say quickly, but diagnosed, and it's much more of a direct to consumer way, because, you know, at least to this day, the docs that I've spoken to, it's, you know, when you prescribe a pill, a pharmacist is on the other side ultimately. In this case, who is on the other side? Who is doing the quote unquote the support of the DTx? You know, the nurses don't have the time. The front office doesn't have the time. And so there's still think a little bit of the hesitancy. And look, sometimes we don't even know how to use Zoom, right? Or there's issues, right? So
I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think when we talk about the adoption of digital therapeutics by our medical colleagues, it's a normal distribution curve. It's currently only the tail end of the champions and interested clinicians who are starting to recommend these solutions. But you're absolutely right. The things that our physicians are really nervous about is, one, can they trust it? Comes back to that risk aversion. Second of all, what's the process for prescribing? Third of all, what's the ongoing risk management? So what happens if this product changes after I've prescribed it and it introduces a new risk? That's a real worry for physicians. The next one is, who's paying for it? I don't want to create a digital divide, particularly for physicians working in the NHS. So I need everybody to have access to this in a fair and equitable way. And then the fifth big worry is, well, what happens if the patient comes back with loads and loads of questions? To your point, where's the pharmacist in all of this? Now, when we're working with different parts of the healthcare system, we have that exact conversation, and we're saying that's your gap. Who's filling that gap? Now, for example, in the NHS, we have something called social prescribers, and this is a new workforce within the NHS. And this workforce are the people who have time to have that very conversation. But not everybody has that, so we have to deal with that head on. And I think the biggest challenge to that problem is people just aren't aware. And they just expect some kind of osmosis to happen, that people will start using digital health interventions and doctors will just start prescribing it without thinking through the true barriers.
This is such a phenomenal and riveting conversation. I think we can keep going. And the chat and the Q&A have been on fire throughout, and I hope we've tried to touch on some of them. We have 3 minutes to go, and I would love to ask all of you, gaze into the crystal ball, short term and maybe medium term. Where do you think we're headed? Where do you think prescription digital therapeutics is headed? If you could say it in 1 line, 2 lines.
Delight the end customer of it. That's it.
Displaced behavior as the obstacle.
Demonstrate near-term value.
Becoming the primary data source to support therapy generally.
Do you want to go, Will? I'm being polite here, being very British.
I was going to say, Chris did it actually in 1 sentence. I'm impressed, Chris.
For me, mine is get ready for the challenge. This is a long-term journey.
For me, it's about the commercial winners will probably prevail here. This is about go-to-market and incentives.
Okay, awesome. I think with that, we can call it a wrap. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us and for everybody who's been engaged throughout this conversation. I hope that this has been a useful session for those of you who are new to this industry, or for those who are not, that it's validated some of your concerns or helped you find a couple of new answers. Thanks so much for joining.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.